Hello, everybody. Let's check if this is actually live. And give me some feedback on the audio, first things first. If you could. Yep, it's live. And how is the audio? If anyone could give me quick feedback on that. No, well, we'll just assume that it's fine then, all right? So, thought I'd do it from a bit different setting, a bit more comfy, coming from my comfy chair instead of from my office. And that's going to be setting the tone. Just a bit of nothing really important going on. So it's to kind of celebrate 1,500 subscribers. I wanted to do the meme number subscribers, and let me see if I can show you that. No. Well, I wanted to do the meme number subscribers, but we passed those, and we're the 1,500 subscribers now, so fine. Gonna take questions from you guys. Otherwise, I have a bunch of notes I can go through and talk about. Maybe that'll prompt conversation. First thing I want to say is a quick quote. Through science, man strives to learn more of the mysteries of creation. Through religion, he seeks to know the creator. Wernher Freiherr von Braun. Now, if you don't know, Wernher Freiherr von Braun was a rocket scientist, of course, who used to develop the V2 rockets for the NSDAP in Germany. And he later went on to develop rockets for NASA. But he was also a very, very religious man. He became a religious fanatic evangelical later on in life, which I find interesting. There's also this quote, I forget who said it, but it was a Nobel Prize winner in physics as well. The first drink of the natural sciences will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And I kind of tend to agree with that. Because I think more and more as you learn about physics and biology and so on, and you start to understand that there is law and order in the universe, you're not the kind of atheistic skeptic like most are. There's a bit of spirituality there, even if you put it in materialist terms. And I'm currently writing an edition of Dietze Bazuin about archaeofuturism, about combining tradition, technology, It's one of my favorite topics. Unfortunately, a lot of writers are being a bit slow. So if you're one of the writers and you're watching this, get to work. Because I will be sending you this and I will be harassing you again. And further on that, I'm going to share with you some of the stuff we do outside of the videos for Bazuin. Here we go. Think you can see that? Yes. Right, so I make most of these small posters. There's some other guys who make a lot of art. If you follow the Dutch channel, you'll know that there's some animations on there. Thanks to Albert and to Jupiter, especially for their work. This is one I made. This is one of my favorites. I tend to just repurpose older stuff. I grab some old posters and designs and things, and I throw them in the blender and I make something new. I made this one, for example, today for the elections, because we've got elections coming up. And a lot of people have been asking me, what should we vote? Again, there's a video in Dutch about that on the Dietze Bazuin channel. If you haven't watched that, go watch that. But my recommendation on the whole is just kind of to vote your conscience. But I think the most pragmatic choice is PVV. On the whole, none of it will matter. It's going to be the VVD is going to be the biggest. It's going to be a coalition with the left, most likely. And it doesn't really matter if you vote SGP, Forum, or PVV because it's not going to make a difference in the end. So I guess vote your consciousness on that. Personally, I'm voting Wilders because I'm kind of tired of Baudet's antics. And I think a large PVV is a better signal than one seat more for FVD. I would vote SGP, but, well, they're too weak on migration, unfortunately. So now, let's see if we've got anything from the chat, otherwise I'll start on the notes. Oh, here's a Dutch question. You're very much against liberalism. Are there aspects or elements that you would incorporate out of liberalism, like private property and markets? I don't think private property is a liberal concept. I think private property is an innate concept. See, this is one of those things Marxists always say, right? Oh, private property is a creation of society. And you could say Rousseau came up with that idea, right? Because Rousseau has this idea that when man first created the concept of property, he created the concept of evil and competition and so on. See, I don't think that's how it works. Animals have territory, right? Animals have space. They need living space. They compete for hunting grounds. They compete for foraging. So they have property in a sense in that they have territory. They have a space they have appropriated for themselves to need to feed and survive on. And I think that's really, if you go really as abstract as possible with it, that's the basis of property rights. Property rights are just the concept of appropriating things for yourself so you can survive. Now, of course, humans are more complex beings, and we've developed this concept much more. And therefore, we've got all kinds of things like the whole system of laws laws. It has a lot to do with, for example, regulating inheritance, regulating divorce and marriage, which has also a lot to do with property rights. So I don't think property rights is something liberal. I think property rights is something that's basically innate to living beings in its most abstract sense. Markets are also something. There's this. I was talking to my dad about this the other night. My dad, about this experiment with monkeys, where they introduced currency to monkeys. They gave monkeys coins, and they could exchange the coins for cucumbers. And you immediately saw, like before that, they would just eat what the zoo gave them, right? But here they could only get the food from spending the coins for cucumbers or other fruits. And you immediately saw trends developing, prostitution was one of the first things that happened. Females would get other males would get males to pay them to the coins so they could eat food and could have more food. You got some monkeys hoarding coins, so they had more. Others had complete no impulse control, spent all their coins, and then tried to steal from the ones who hoarded. So you immediately developed all these societal trends. And I guess that kind of, in a sense, that proves Rousseau kind of right? But even like basic primitive tribes, because Rousseau relied very much on this noble savage idea. He had never been to America, but he used his romanticized ideas about Native Americans, about Indians, to formulate his idea about property. And he gave all these examples about Indians. And I guess the monkey experiment kind of proves that property, or at least means of exchange and store of value, has an influence on behavior to a great extent. But if you want to have anything more than living in the moment and consuming what's right in front of you, you're going to need some kind of store of value and currency. Even if you exchange goods, you're already creating markets. So again, are markets something that's liberal? I don't think markets are something that's necessarily liberal. I think markets are something that any species competent enough to develop something like trade has. Like the monkeys can develop a system of trade and exchange, but they weren't capable, they weren't intelligent enough to develop the idea. That had to be introduced from the outside to them. But they immediately start displaying the same behaviors as the humans did. So I don't think markets are a necessarily liberal thing either. Okay, carrying on. Do you prefer common law or civil law? I prefer civil law because things are written down and things are clear, and it's not up to interpretation of the judge. And jury trials are a terrible idea, in my opinion, because it makes it completely subjective. It makes it a theater play. This is why American lawyers are more than anything theater actors, and they like my father's a lawyer. I studied law for about a year. I know a little bit about it. I'm not exactly an expert, but I know a little bit about it. And how it works here, it is like you're doing bureaucracy. You're filing constantly things. You're following the rules and so on. And it's not about trying to convince a jury or anything. At most, you have to convince a panel of judges, but the judges aren't there to give their opinion or to interpret the law. The judges are only there to execute the law. This is the Dutch system. This is the civil code system. I think the common law system is just from a previous era and was never updated, and it's just kind of a poor system. What's your stance on antidepressants? Have you ever considered taking them? Depends. Is alcohol considered an antidepressant? Because then yes. Otherwise, no. I'm not a fan of actually substances. See, I'm not sure about this. I've been thinking about adrenaline lately. You get in a fight, you get punched in the face, and suddenly, boom, everything slows down. Your reaction speed increases immensely. You can track all kinds of things around you. The adrenaline pumping through your system makes your brain so much better at functioning. Of course, it shuts down higher brain functions. You're not exactly doing abstract reasoning, but your real-time reaction and so on is enormously improved. And I found that quite curious because I got into a fight a little while back, and I just started analyzing that. And I was thinking, well, that's quite interesting. I wonder if with drugs and things and manipulating the brain, you could really improve performance and so on, and just shift your brain to what it needs to do at a certain moment by taking, say, adrenaline or something to improve or shut down cognitive functions. So, on the whole, I'm against hedonistic drugs that you just take for pleasure. And I'm not really convinced that antidepressants actually work, to be honest. But I think performance enhancing drugs, I don't know. Kind of depends if you can do them safely. So you things with like PEDs, like testosterone and so on, they have very, very heavy negative effects. They shut down your normal hormonal production. Your balls stop working, things like that. But if you can take things like adrenaline, which are pretty much without downsides, I don't think that's really a moral problem. It's just to improve your performance. It's the same thing. Like, is it immoral to train yourself in something to get better at it, or to like do analysis of problems and systems to get better at solving them? I don't think so. Are you in favor of a constitutional court? And do you want elected judges like in the US? No, I don't want elected judges like in the US. I think they should be by appointment still. It should be meritocratic. Like in the Netherlands, you have to have served, I think it's 7 years as a lawyer before you can apply to be a judge, and then you enter as a judge in the lower courts, the what's it called again, the kantonrechters, and then you work your way up the system. I do think we should have a constitutional court because the Raad van State is a very, very poor system. The Raad van State is our equivalent of the constitutional court. The head of it is the king. Then the crown prince or princess is on it, and then a number of appointees, and I think the leader of the Senate and a few others. And it's a very shitty system because it's extremely nepotistic, and most people don't even know about it. Um, or how it works. But that's the and it gives advice to the government on what sort of how to implement laws, how to write laws, things like that. And if it should either then be under the actual control of the king, which nominally it is, but the king is never there, and it's sort of the tradition that the king never goes to the Raad van State. But I would prefer an actual court where people can petition to put cases before and so on, because as it is now, it's quite nepotistic and closed off. Oh yeah, thanks for the channel growing. Yeah, last time I did a stream like this, I was at about 850 or so subscribers, so that's good growth, I guess. Do you see credible change in Europe coming from an economic crisis and not principally from political upheaval? I think economic crisis will completely change the playing field. Yes, as everyone knows, and everyone says this constantly, really one of the main factors why people don't want more radical change because they're too comfortable. And if people start feeling it in their pockets, that'll change things. It's actually a myth that the NSDAP was elected in Germany because of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was already past its peak, and it was getting better in Germany by 1932. And of course, the NSDAP only won elections in 1932 and 1933. It had more to do with the rising threat of communism. But they did get a boost, of course, from the Great Depression. So yeah, of course, economic instability changes things. Every crisis is an opportunity, I'd say. Oh, it's to Pete. Yes, I did. Well, sort. He's not exactly the same, but sort of, right? Are you a Salazar respecter? Yeah, sure. Uh, I grew up in Portugal. Oh, my camera sort of froze there. Can people still hear me? Hold on. Just have to shut that down, I guess, for a moment. Um, I went to school in Portugal, and I actually the school system in Portugal wasn't really reformed since the time of Salazar, and I actually think it was quite a good system. You learn it was just a broad classical education you got. You learned philosophy, you learned mathematics, music, languages, sports. You had mandatory sports like throwing lances, bow, running, climbing, all sorts of things. I think it was a good curriculum, and I think and I had a history teacher who actually was quite fond of Salazar. See, I lived in an area where a lot of people who had come back from the colonies, a lot of Portuguese who were forced out of the Angola and Mozambique, and they at least their fathers and grandfathers. There were quite a few irredentists over there who were really not happy that they'd lost the colonies. So yeah, sure, I respect Salazar. What's my favorite nasheed? I guess just the standard one. What's the? I think I have it saved on my PC, but I better not play it. The one from ISIS. Yeah, Saeed Al Saudi. That's the one. Isn't adrenaline incurring extreme stress on the body, and as such would be quite bad to the taking a substance in the long run? Yeah, of course, if you're constantly abusing it, it will destroy you. But just taking it once and then letting your system recover doesn't leave any permanent damage. Are you in favor of rechtsstaat? Yeah, what's rechtsstaat? I guess a rule of law. I guess uh, where it will be where authority will be limited by the constitution. I guess if I'm in favor of constitutional and rule of law, I just don't think that actually exists. I think that's a liberal democratic lie. The idea that constitutions actually matter. In the end, what happens is always that the powerful will do what they want, and they'll dress it up with law whenever necessary or whenever convenient. But in the end, it'll get ignored. Just look at, for example, how protests are treated. We've got some protests going on in the Netherlands again, people getting beat up, and yeah, camera's working again. And every time the left does a protest, they can do whatever they want. So rule of law doesn't actually exist. There's just rule by power. The powerful decide, and therefore the best thing to do is to have people in power who have a common interest with the majority of the people, which is why I think even aristocracy and monarchy are better systems than what we have today with this supposed liberal democracy. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the 2000 elections with Wales. I'll probably be doing an after-election commentary with Red Eyes. That's not decided just yet, but I'll probably be doing a post-election commentary, not a live stream this time. I'm not part of an organization anymore, so I can't really set up like big events like that live stream event. What is the native Dutch birth rate? Around 1.6. It's actually surprising. I looked this up once. The lowest was 1.5 around the 80s, and it climbed back up to 1.8 around 2010, and now it's decreased again to 1.6 over the last 10 years. Still better than, for example, Spain or Italy, which are around 1.2, 1.3, but not exactly spectacular. Foreign birth rates stand at around 1.9 to 2.2, depending on which group you look at. How do I? Yeah, sure. Okay, guess no questions, and I'll go through some notes. One thing I wanted to get into. I want to give this thought experiment to you guys because I think it's a good one to think about. Infertility is actually a major issue. It's interesting that you came up with birth rates because I had this one noted down. Um, Consider this thought experiment. What would you do if you knew that tomorrow no more babies would be born? Like today is the last day any babies are born, and from then on, no more children are born. It will just be declining and aging and eventually dying out. I think that is an interesting thing to consider for what you would do yourself and how that would change society. Because it's at some point, even with the degeneracy and so on of society today, we still look long term in many things. We're still working to pass things on to future generations. There's still in the back of the mind the consideration that we'll be passing all of this on to someone in the future. Even liberals are thinking of passing this on to someone in the future, even if it isn't their own people or their own families. But there's still the idea that in 100 years there will still be people. But consider that it wouldn't be the case. Consider that, let's say, in 80 years' time, all humans are dead. How would that affect your actions in today? How would that affect how society is ordered? I think it's an interesting thought experiment to consider for yourself. I think I'll take some questions in a moment. I'll just go by one. Oh yeah, Mark Antony's funeral oration. I don't know if you guys noticed, but so the reason I started doing this YouTube channel was kind of my logic was that there aren't the way things have grown in the United States and Britain and has been through these online personalities, and we don't have those in the Netherlands or really in many other European countries. And I think it's actually greatly beneficial to a movement to have figureheads. And I think in the human mind, fundamentally, no matter how rational you are, people still behave like tribal people, and they look up to leaders and they want leadership. Um, no, I don't actually really want to be a leader, but since I'm crazy enough to do it, I decided to do it because I thought it would be a hub to concentrate energy around and to do productive things. And one of my inspirations for this was Mark Antony's funeral oration to Caesar, in which he manages to turn the crowd, like the Brutus and so on, assassinate Caesar, and they convince the people of Rome that they did it to prevent a dictator, and they did it in the best tradition of the Republican tradition of Rome and so on. And Mark Antony really sarcastically at the funeral oration goes on, "Oh, but Brutus said, what was it? Brutus is a noble man." And he keeps repeating that line, and he just completely turns the crowd around, and then he reads Caesar's will, and Caesar promises all this money to the people of Rome, and they're like, "Oh, Caesar was actually on our sides," and Caesar was, well, a literal populist actually, because that was the division in Rome at the time, optimatus versus popularis. And this one man turns the whole crowd around, and the people of Rome turn on Brutus and the others, and they are forced to flee the city. And that's the power one man can have over a crowd. And I think that's kind of how politics still to this day works. You need to have charismatic leaders. This is one of the things that Baudet has in his favor. He's a very charismatic guy, but he's also just too narcissistic and unstable to wield that properly. And that's kind of unfortunate. So, yeah, just one of those things. All right, let's get back into questions. What do you think of Bitcoin and crypto? Complex issue. See, one of the things is with the blockchain thing, I'm not convinced that it's actually censorship proof. If a government at this stage decides to enter Bitcoin, for example, as a miner, and just tries to take over 51% of the miners of the network with enough capacity, they could do it with a few $billion. Well, not maybe, what's the operating capacity? Something like. But a government could do it. Like the United States could easily take over 51% of the mining network of Bitcoin, and then they basically decide what gets to be on the blockchain and what doesn't. Hopefully, this would result in an arms race between nation states, where nations start trying to take over shares of the mining network, so that and it becomes basically geopolitics, where coalitions of minor nations can try to overcome the 51% and try to expand their capacity so that no one country has control, and it basically becomes a balance of power issue. Like you don't want anyone to have 51% of the network, and you want to have like regulations and treaties on what gets to be put on the blockchain or not. But I'm fundamentally not convinced that it couldn't be done. In fact, Bitcoin is still relatively so small that it is still subject to constant pump and dumps by bigger hedge funds and so on. So cryptos I have a few friends who are really into cryptos, who really know the tech behind it and so on. And I'm not nearly as good as them about this. I really wish I could do a podcast with one of them, but he doesn't want to get doxxed, so he doesn't want to do a podcast with me. But on the whole, I'm in favor of decentralized systems of payment of currencies. I don't want the state. Well, not even the state. Central banks are private entities. They're just banks. They're banks for banks and controlled by banks. If it were the state controlling it, that would even be better than just it being private. But I would even rather have something independent of the state, like the gold standard used to be. In the end, the gold standard is independent of any controlling entity. It's the only limiting factor is just what's in nature. So I would prefer something like a gold standard or something. But cryptos, there's a lot of interesting technology with cryptos, like blockchain technology. By itself is interesting. I know some guys, some friend of mine works for a big bank here in the Netherlands, and he does research on blockchain technology to be used in, for example, tax collection, because this is extremely interesting for our tax service, our version of the IRS, because everything's traceable. And so there's no way to avoid paying taxes. There's no black or gray economy anymore. So governments would want blockchain technology as well. So I think crypto is a very complex issue. And if I can find someone who really wants to talk about that, I'll do a separate podcast about it sometime where I can go more in depth about it. But I'm not really enough of an expert to really talk in depth about that. Da-da-da. I heard plenty of Dutch have moved to South Africa since the commies took over. I've never heard that, so news to me. What's the biggest factor that prevents the spread of identitarianism? Pavlov syndrome. You get educated against in the education system, and it's constantly reinforced against you by the media. So you need to break that cycle of reinforcement. That's kind of how people get red pilled, right? The narrative breaks in their head, whether that's about women or about money or about race or anything else. The standard narrative gets broken, so they start questioning other things, and the reinforcement from the media stops working. And so breaking the cycle of reinforcement that you get from birth basically is the way to do it. Would it be better for the Netherlands if America loses her hegemony and China becomes the new world leader? It would be good for a world if America lost its hegemony, because on the whole it would stop a lot of these degenerate trends. Being dominated by China, though, might not be the best thing. China has a long history of eradicating everyone who's not them. Han Chinese originally originated from a few basins around the Yellow River and the Yangtze River and so on, and expanded outward. And like they're genociding the people in Xinjiang right now, the Uyghurs. They've been doing that for a long time, sending with Tibet, for example. And I wouldn't trust that they wouldn't eventually just eradicate all other ethnicities. I think this is inevitable in the long run anyway, that there will only be one ethnicity. But I would prefer if Europe could form its own power bloc, if we could start acting in our own interests again. And I think the collapse of America would accelerate that in one way or another. It would force our politicians to pick a side. Are we going to go with China? Are we going to go independent? Because America as a protection is gone. It's no longer an option. It's either sink with the Chinese or swim as ourselves. So on the whole, I think America needs to disappear. At least, well, it would be best if it broke up into separate countries or something like that. What's your opinion on the Dutch royal family? I don't have much of an opinion about it. I think there's a few kings I like. Wilhelm I was a great king. He was trying to be an absolutist monarch after Napoleon. Very conservative guy. Tried to stop the installing of the constitution and civil rights and so on. So great guy. Wilhelmina, the queen who was the queen during the Second World War, was a very maternal figure. She invested massively in the country, helped develop the port of Rotterdam, the Flevopolder, and so on. Current kings is kind of a weakling. See, people complain about someone like Prince Bernhard, who was a corrupt guy who controlled the intelligence services essentially. And I think, well, that's what the king should be. Well, he shouldn't be corrupt, but the king should be a guy actually exercising power. He should actually be involved in the affairs of state. And our current king, I don't know, he doesn't seem to be involved with anything. So it's kind of like the monarchy here doesn't have the status it has in the United Kingdom. I think half the time people even forget we live in a monarchy. And when they are reminded of it, they'll complain that it's too expensive. So it kind of hangs by the popularity of the king himself, I guess. And with 3 princesses, I don't think the popularity of the monarchy is really going to increase. So on principle, I would prefer a monarchy, but I'm not sure the House of Orange is really going to be able to bring back the monarchies as such. Can I please say something nice about Forum for Democracy? They were good in 2017. Not anymore, but they were good in 2017. What am I going to vote? PVV. Now, see, it's not Forum for Democracy ruined things for themselves, right? They constantly chose the least strategical options, and they also don't have a spine, right? They get, for example, in 2018, Ramatar Singh starts this whole debacle about race and IQ in the media, right? He even gets support from quite a lot of the right-wing media. But what does FVD do? They throw him out of the party and they cuck. Weak. If they're going to be constantly doing all this stuff about anti-Semitism and about race and IQ and so on, and constantly hinting at things, take a fucking stand. Have a spine, just say, okay, there are differences between people, and here's the scientific studies, and we're going to do an interview with James Watson on our YouTube channel, and here's a Nobel Prize winning scientist to explain you how DNA and heritability have an influence on intelligence. Just do that. I can't respect them for their lack of a spine. And every time there's something like, in 2019, at the end of 2019, I was at an event here in Rotterdam. It became a whole media thing. And you know why? Because I went to talk to someone who worked for the Israeli embassy, and I went to confront him about his hypocrisy. Well, I was just kind of talking like, well, Zionism is ethno-nationalism for Jews, and you guys had Jerry Jabotinsky and so on, and that's really radical Zionism. So if you guys can have that for your people, why can't we have that for our people? I think I kind of tried to find common ground with the guy, and just egg him on a little bit about the hypocrisy of Zionism versus ethno-nationalism. It became a big media story. And what did they do? They tried to throw a few people out of the party. I heard in backrooms they were really trying to find ways to damage me. And it's like, what? Why? It's such a weak attitude they have. And then these associations with people like Lange Frans and supporting like Free Ross Ulbricht, all these things. It's just complete waste of time for democracy, in my opinion. What do you think of the Dutch electoral system? Would you prefer a regional system, or should there be a vote? In my ideal system, we would restore a lot of powers to the provinces. We would just have the Rijksoverheid be defense and a few things necessarily centralized thing like infrastructure and so on. And we give the provinces a lot of their own authority, their own police and so on. So you'd vote for people in the province, and then people in the province send constituents to the Rijksoverheid, kind of like how the federal system works in Germany or how the Holy Roman Empire used to work. I think localism is a very good thing. We need to have more local power, and we need to take a lot of power away from central institutions. No central banks, no more EU or reduced central government, because you need to be able to have people accountable. And if people live in your neighborhood, they're a lot more accountable than if they're very far away. As for the electoral system, well, we've got some stupid things like reststemmen or because you don't actually vote exactly just for a party. They get a pool of votes, and if they get an amount of votes that's not quite a seat, this gets lumped into a pool. So say for democracy gets 180. No, well, they'll get more. Let's say they get 300,000 votes. That's about 3.5 seats. That half seat, so about 30,000 votes, gets added to a pool with all the other votes that don't quite go to a seat, and then that'll be distributed from the biggest party to the smallest party. And that's a dumb system, because it implicitly assumes that people would have voted for the big party then. And this also happens with parties that don't get enough votes for a seat. So, for example, Code Oranje gets 10,000 votes. The 10,000 votes get added into the pool and then redistributed among the parties who did get seats. That's a terrible system. They should just have either round up or round down or something like that. There's other solutions. Do you believe the white man evolved from the black man? Now, see, this is one of those really simplistic ideas about evolution that is in the pop culture, but that's not actually how the evolution even works. We have a common ancestor, but that wasn't a black guy. The point of divergence between Europeans and Africans is somewhere around pre-Homo Homo sapiens, and you get, for example, one of the theories I heard is that Europeans actually got to Europe from, so they first went through East Asia, mixed with Denisovans and other local groups and so on, and then eventually got into, I don't quite remember it anymore. But anyway, the point of divergence between Europeans and blacks, where they start a separate evolution, is something like 80,000 years ago, and it wasn't even Homo sapiens yet at that point. And it only takes like 500 years for divergent evolution to take hold. I mean, you've got different populations within Africa as well, right? Like Congolese aren't the same as Somalis. There's different ethnic groups there, Nilotics, Congolese, and so on. And then in South Africa, there's loads. And island populations isolated will go into divergent evolution and have really strange traits, like dwarfism, for example, is one of those things they develop on islands. But on the whole, this is a really stupid meme idea about biology that's in the public consciousness, but it's not quite how it works. We have a common ancestor, but that's way back. And if you go back all the way back to the oxygen holocaust, which happened like 3 billion years ago, everything's descended from those bacteria that were producing oxygen and eradicated everything else. So we all have a common ancestors all the way back at some point, but it's not quite that we evolved from the black man. The black man is a separate branch in an evolutionary tree. I thought Europeans have more Neanderthal than Denisovans. Yes, that's correct. About 5%. Denisovan is more. So this paper that I read was what the common idea is that people or pre-Homo sapiens migrated to the Fertile Crescent and then from the Fertile Crescent to Europe. This paper held that they had actually gone through Madagascar, the Indonesian archipelago, and then through China, and then each time mixing with local populations, which turned them closer to Homo sapiens as well. and then through Siberia, gone all the way to Europe, because the actual population in Europe is for a very large part something descended called from the Yamnaya population, especially in Northern Europe. And this is what we commonly call European, well, at least for the north, the blue eye, blonde type phenotype. And those came from Siberia, and the idea is those are kind of made this all the way round trip over the course of something like 30,000 years. But I'm not sure about the validity of that paper, but it was quite interesting. Also, you've got these findings of teeth in Greece and in Ukraine that predate some Homo sapiens fossils from Africa. So, I mean, the whole out of Africa theory is in flux, let's say, within the world of biology. And again, I'm not a biologist. I try to keep up with all these things, but I'm not a full-time biologist, so I don't have the time to read all of it. Are you associated with the Ackerman Group? I was one of the first people with it. I helped build it up, but I haven't been involved with them in what's been almost 4 years now. Actually, I was with them for about 2 years. Left in 2017, end of 2017, because of some differences. And at this point, I haven't criticized them in public, and I don't really want to. But at this point, I don't think it's valuable to associate with them. Rudolf Steiner. I have a note here about Rudolf Steiner and theosophy. I need to read a bit more about him. We have in the Netherlands a system called the Vrije School, which is the school founded by Rudolf Steiner, and they gave lessons about race and so on until 1996 in the Vrije School, and they still hold to a lot of these Germanic ideals. Rudolf Steiner had to go into nature, contact with nature, learn about the plants and the wildlife and so on, go camping. But I have a few friends who send their kids to a Vrije School, and apparently it's one of the better school systems for your to send your kids to, better than the public schools or Montessori. Do you believe in God? In a sense, too complex to get into. I've got a stream called Materialism versus Spiritualism on here, where I discuss with another guy. Basically my perspectives on materialism and so on. I think the possibility of God is absolutely there. There's something that created order in the universe. There's a reason there isn't chaos. There's a reason there is something, and this could very well be the creation of something which has a deterministic will, who wants to establish something. So I think there's the possibility of God. I don't really believe in a God as it is described in, say, Abrahamic religions or anything like that. That's too human. If there is such a thing as God, it's far less human than that. Geert Wilders is a beep beep. Why vote for PVV? They all are, though. SGP is Zionist, PVV is Zionist, Forum for Democracy is Zionist. Doesn't matter. To me, that's not even a criterion anymore. I ignore it because they all are. So until there's until super based party turns up who has all the right positions, I'm just gonna be pragmatic. Honestly, I'm kind of done with the whole. We got a purity spiral about everything, and I'm gonna not vote because they disagree with me on this one economic policy or that one. It's like yes, they're PVV are social democratic liberals who hate Muslims. That's about it. Right? And they're very Zionistic. I know. They're still the only party on somewhat more to the right than the mainstream who could possibly maybe change things a little bit for the better. And even there, I don't have much hope for it. What's your opinion on Germanic paganism? Don't have much of an opinion about it. Animism, in my opinion, is a pretty normal system of religion. Abrahamism and God damn it, what's polytheism and monotheism. Monotheistic religions are pretty unique, and do they get at some truths? I used to have a bit more of a position on this when I was reading more about religion. It might makes right in Nietzschean morality. Right. I think their moral system is closer to how the universe actually works with social Darwinism and so on than some of the more meek Christian morality. But I think Christian theology and thinking is much more developed than Germanic pagan thought. Germanic pagan thought is sort of from the belly, instinctual, might makes right sort of thinking, the animalistic. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it's not exactly a system you're going to be able to build an advanced society on. And I think things like concepts like natural law, which were developed within Christianity and so on, are also are necessary to develop more advanced societies. Of course, Christianity relies on a lot of things from like Platonism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, and so on, and helped and it's very very Greek actually in a lot of ways, Greek and Roman. So you could say that paganism, if you're looking at Greek paganism, still influences the modern world to a very large extent. Less so Norse, of course. I mean, might make right is kind of how things work in reality, but at this point, that's mostly the case on the level of geopolitics, for example. Do you think Guillaume Faye was an important writer and thinker? Yes, I think the French Nouvelle Droit was actually like my favorite reactionary philosophical school is the Revolutionary Revolution. The guys like Arthur Moeder van den Broek, Spengler, Jung, and so on. But I think the archaeofuturists actually were one of the ones to actually start developing right-wing thought after the Second World War and have done some interesting contributions. Like I really like the idea of archaeofuturism. So yeah, I absolutely think they contributed quite a lot to reactionary right-wing traditionalist thought. So yeah, I do like Faye. So you're black pilled like Devon Stack. I don't know who that is, but I'm pretty fatalistic about all of it. I mean, I fundamentally believe humanity is going to be replaced by something within like 100 years, like something like AI or bioengineering or something. So I'm pretty black pill, I guess you could put it. Yeah. Did you see Yinek with Baudet? I didn't see it, but I more or less heard what happened. Make a boring show so they can't hide their contempt energizing. Right? Yeah, I guess that was pretty unstrategic move, giving him like they insulted his family. I think, as I understand it, which really lost them the moral high ground. If they hadn't done that, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. But I mean, what do you expect? I mean, I get media requests like every 2 or 3 months. I get like journalists asking me to take part. Like I got Danny op Straat a few months ago. One guy making a documentary about right wing in the Netherlands. Some guys from usually it's like De Groene or AD contacting me, asking me to do interviews or talk about right wing thought, and I always refuse because there's nothing you can gain by that. The only thing they're going to do is frame you like you don't know who else they're interviewing. They could be interviewing some skinheads, and even just the framing that there's a skinhead in frame and there's you in frame, that association is made negative image. And you could be the most elegant person in the world. They'll snip and snap as they like. So don't talk to the media. There's nothing to be gained by it. You just have to build your own media. You have to build your own audience because they have the ability to put a filter between you and the public. You don't want that. So I think Baudet's an idiot for still talking to the media. He knows what happens. This time it backfired on them, but he shouldn't even try. Like, why are the SGP and him doing YouTube shows? Because they know they can get an unfiltered message to the public that way. You should focus on doing that. Try to improve the quality of that. Why did I think you were Catholic? I don't know. I'm pretty sympathetic to Catholicism. I'm pretty sympathetic to Christianity in general. You know, I like a lot of Catholic theology, like Augustine's system of natural law. Is Augustine, or is it Aquinas? Aquinas' system of natural law, and I don't know. I think Christianity is quite fundamental in the development of the thinking of the Western world. So and I'm just not a big fan of the Bible. It's not my people's story. It's about a Bronze Age tribe in the desert that has nothing to do with me. And even if you read it allegorically, it's just not a very. I've read the Bible like 2 or 3 times in its whole. It's not bad stories. It's just not my people's stories, and I don't want the sort of Weltanschauung of my people to be based on the history of some other people, because then you get things like the idiotic Americans who vicariously lived through Israel rather than living for their own people and their own nation, because the Bible is the foundation of their worldview and their worldview. So I'm fine with Catholicism. On the whole, I like Calvinism more because I believe determinism is correct, and Catholics are lazy. And Protestant work ethic is something that gets things done. Like, well, the Spanish and the Portuguese colonized a lot of places, of course, but look at the state of those places compared to what we colonized, right? So, are you active on Telegram? I have a Telegram. I use it for private stuff, but I don't have a channel, because every time I try to make a channel and I open it up to the public, I get a mix of normal people, of halfway red pill people, and then really autistic 1488 spurgs who can't keep their mouths shut, and then they give me a bad name and alienate other people. So I've decided not to use Telegram channels for things like that. What do you think Doolittle got so wrong about religion then? He ignores the fact that humanity is fundamentally religious in their thinking. I don't think I think Doolittle is actually right about a lot of things. I think he's quite an interesting thinker, actually, but he's a bit autistic. He doesn't understand the emotional reality of people and how people function as groups. They need narratives and they need lies and they need emotional investment in things. And religion as a sociological tool gives them stories and gives them purpose, because most people who are under like 120 IQ are incapable of formulating a complete and total purpose of their own. It's like Nietzschean morality. Like Nietzschean morality is something for the really top 10% of IQ or something. That's not something you can give to the majority of people. Even Nietzsche admitted that in his own writing, that it isn't for everybody and that the vast majority will live vicariously to the stories of other people. But that's just how it is. And I think one of the main things about conservative and reactionary thought is that you're not just an idealist, but also pragmatic and realistic, and you deal with the fact that humanity is imperfect and flawed, and because it is imperfect and flawed, you have to adjust your ideals to work with it. You can't be an utopianist like the left is and just try to completely ignore the fact that humans aren't the way you want them to be. French flag. This is the Dutch flag. It's hanging sideways, but that's orange, right? That side. That's orange. The French flag doesn't have orange. Is the West worth saving? Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, the rest of the world shit. Can't develop. Well, China develops a few things, but the rest of the world doesn't develop anything interesting in terms of thought, in terms of innovation. So yeah, of course, the West is worth saving. I mean, what philosophical debates were ever written down by? Well, Africans are the easy one to go through, but even Islamic civilization, Islamic theological debate. I've read a few things. It's terrible. They don't acknowledge causality. Like they believe everything is the intercession by Allah. Like if you don't believe in cause and effect and you don't believe in the chain of logic, you can't analyze the natural world around you. You can't formulate an ontological theory of science. You don't have an epistemology. I mean, the rest of the world's just intellectually kind of boring. They have these weird stories about gods and so on. That's how they see the world. I guess the Chinese get close to having some things like Confucianism and Taoism and so on, and they have something of an ontology. But even the Hindus, they base everything around this animistic god, in a god view of the world. It's barely above animals in their thinking. You can disable comments. Then why have a Telegram channel? If I just want to feed to put things on, I build a website. Calvinism denies free will in regards to salvation. I don't believe free will exists. I tend to side with the computational model of consciousness, although I have to say Penrose is doing some interesting things in disproving that. With I have a website open about this, Qualia Computing. Maybe I can share that on the screen. If you want to read about like free will and hold on. Where is it? Here. Oh no, that's escaping. Gnosticism. Why can't I find it? Ah, here we go. So this website, I hope you guys can see that, has a lot of stuff about what current developments within thinking about consciousness. Yeah, computational properties of consciousness. This is the sort of thing that I tend to side with within the thinking about free will and consciousness. And on the whole, I think human brains are basically just very good computers. Neurons are just really good processors. And what we're doing is constantly reacting to external stimuli. Like 99% of what you do in a day is reacting to instinct. Why do you want to have sex? Why do you want to have children? Instinct. Why do you eat? Why do you do most of the things you do in a day? Instinct. How do you react to things? Combination of instinct and pre-trained and recognized things. You've been socialized to find things acceptable or to react in certain ways. So on the whole, I side against free will in most cases. I think there's some level of it. I mean, if you're a traditional Christian, of course, you have to believe in free will because there's the divine spark, there's the soul, and your God has given you free will according to the Bible, so you have to believe in it. I'm kind of like, for free will to be absolute and exist absolutely, you have to have some form of consciousness beyond the material being, so some form of soul. And I don't believe in that because I'm a materialist. I don't think there is something beyond death, and I don't think there is something beyond the material. So if you can find some way to prove that there is, like, this is the hard problem of consciousness as well. And anyway, I'm not going to do a stream about neurology. So, but I side against free will on the whole. Christians are Israel. Yeah, well, that's what a true Christian will tell you, is that by denying Christ, the Jews lost favor of God, and Christians are the true new Israel. Sin having nothing to do with salvation is very demonic as well. You can murder and rape hundreds of children and still get into heaven because you're a part of the elect. Yeah, I'm not sure about that part of Calvinism, where it's like the predestination part, where morality just doesn't matter because every decision you make isn't really yours and it's been decided by God. To an extent, that makes sense within the idea of a computational model of consciousness. But I don't know. I don't have that parat ready to go to talk to you about that. But on the whole, I do think there is such a thing as moral behavior. And, well, to put it this way, if you are born with a certain type of brain, maybe you're going to be more likely to commit crime. Therefore, you were always meant to be more likely to commit a murder. So if you believe that genes, for example, have more than 60% influence on your actions, that denies an extent to your free will, and therefore it means you're more likely to commit crime. So in a sense, you're predestined to be a criminal, right? That's something that's a topic on itself. Really, a lot of these things you guys are asking are things that I would have like an hour-long discussion about. I can't really go in that much detail. Or you want to start a family? If so, when do you see it happening? I do want to start a family when I see it happening, maybe in 10 years or so. How old am I? I'm 30. I'm familiar with the hard problem of consciousness. Yes. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Again, this is a real big topic, man. I'll note that down to make a conversation with Top Der Duinen about maybe the hard problem of consciousness and so on, because that's a big topic. I prefer making a separate video about it. There's no political way to get out of the debt spiral in the West. It's revolt or relocation. Your opinion on moving to Romania or Russia? I consider that to be desertion. Yeah, you have to fall where you stand. Um, it's your duty to your people, to your country, to your history to, well, do your best or die trying, in my opinion. And so I wouldn't move, really. I've got the option. My parents have an estate in Portugal I could move to, but I don't because I think you have to do your best as a man to improve your country and leave a better situation behind, even if it is impossible. That's Spengler quote, right? True nobility is the Roman soldier at Pompeii who refuses to leave his post even as the volcano is exploding because he hasn't been relieved from his duty. I think that's sort of how you have to think about these things. You've got to be very stoic and fatalistic about it. Maybe your struggles are in vain, but not struggling is even worse. How did the material world come into being? See, if I knew that, I'd be winning Nobel Prizes, man. Are you still against allowing English access to Dutch cheese? Yes. We are going to hoard all of the cheese. Going to build a big, beautiful wall all around the Netherlands with cheese. And anyone who tries to take a bite gets shot. All right, let's see if I have any more on my notes to talk about. Oh yeah, I had this thought. See, I write these notes down and I never develop them, and I should make them into videos when I have these thoughts. But um, I find this idea like I think fundamentally at some point we're going to develop technology that will replace us, singularity to an extent. We'll have AI that will be better than man, or we'll be bioengineering ourselves to a point where we'll be better than anything recognizable as man today. But the way I think this is most likely to take place is by reverse engineering neurons, because neurons are a way more powerful processor essentially than anything we can build out of silicon. So I think the way we could survive into the future as human DNA, such as we would say it today, is by basically integrating our brains into these computers as sort of the hard processor, which would be biological. And I think, in a sense, bioengineering could be a solution towards having humanity travel into the future. Not in a form that maybe we'd recognize as such today, but I think bioengineering is the future. But I had this thought: how would a society look like that from the start would try to bioengineer everything? Because theoretically, a lot of things are possible with just with bioengineering, muscle contractions and so on. But again, I didn't develop this thought well enough. But that's one of those things I think about. All right, have a drink actually. Is post-Christian Netherlands better than Christian Netherlands? No, I don't think so. Of course, I didn't live in an actual Christian Netherlands. I grew up in. I lived about 10 years in Portugal, and Portugal was still a Catholic country to a large extent. And I lived in the countryside, like the biggest town near me had 20,000 residents. And and people went to church on Sundays, and people were fundamentally religious and believed, and they read the Bible, or not, they didn't read the Bible because they were Catholic. The preacher told them at catechism. And I went to catechism as well. And I guess, officially speaking, I would be Catholic, I guess. I wasn't baptized though, so no. Um, and that's like those tight knit communities. That's actually very pleasant. I think that religion they did play a role in that. And now, see, I don't know if it's the character of the Dutch necessarily, because we are very direct and very aggressive people, um, but and we're rude. To foreigners especially, we're rude, but even to each other, we're pretty rude. And I don't know if that's a consequence of irreligiosity, to be honest. I think we always were like that, but I think it's gotten to extremes of nihilistic individualism and egoism because of the lack of religion. It does give you like community, right? There's a few religious communities in the Netherlands still, like the Revo and those generally are quite pleasant and nice people. I've had a few friends from church communities at university, especially, and they were the most pleasant people you'd ever meet. Very kind and never a bad word, never have a temper. So I think it does do something positive for society. Would you refuse South Africans entry to the Netherlands as deserters? No, because a colony isn't a homeland, and you can abandon a colony and come back to recolonize, which is why I don't see a problem with America being destroyed. We can always recolonize if necessary. We can't lose anything in Europe, though. If Islam conquered all or most of Europe in the 14th or 15th century, do you think that we would have some sort of reformation of Islam? I don't know. I'm not sure Islam is possible to be reformed. See, the thing is, like, I'm not a very well informed about Islam, but as I understand it, it just has some of these very fundamental assumptions within its theology that basically don't leave much room for interpretation. It's the Sunnahs and it's the Quran, and that's about it. And it's a literalist interpretation, and everything's the will of God directly. Like you light a match, that's not because phosphorus has a certain chemical reaction. No, that's because Allah at that moment wanted to light the match. And if Allah didn't want to light the match, then the match wouldn't light. As I say, you can't build a system of natural, like you can't build an ontology on that. So I'm not sure you could reform Islam. Which do you believe is the better option for nationalists? Pacifism? Do you mean pacifism or passive? Parallelism or activism? I think parallelism is actually the best strategy to build our own institutions and to try to like build our own media, build our own trade unions, build everything like in parallel, exactly. So I think that's actually a viable strategy, at least in Europe, in the Netherlands it is. We could build our own trade unions. It'd be difficult. I'm not saying it wouldn't be hard, but it'd be difficult. But it's doable, I think. It's achievable. I think in the United States, there's basically nothing you can do anymore. But here we still have options. We still have a large white population. It's not quite as ridiculous with the laws like in the United Kingdom or in America. The Fed, there's no such thing as the feds over here to entrap you or anything. I know of some stories of that happening with the NVU and things like that. But if you don't give them, if you're not a bunch of skinheads, they're going to have a hard time entrapping you with things like that. If you just are a legal organization obeying all the principles of the law, it's doable. So I think parallelism is the best option. I think we're too bored to make such an AI robot society. Oh, I think you'd be surprised with the developments in AI going on and with CRISPR and so on. Who's more rude, the French or the Dutch? The French will be rude about you, but incorrect. They'll insult you just to insult you. The Dutch will be rude to you in a way because they're honest. The Dutch will say, like the Frenchman will insult your character or something, and like try to denigrate you. The Dutchman will insult you in a way that is really deeply hurtful because he's being honest. He'll be like, "Oh, that was a really stupid decision you made," or that haircut sucks or that dress is ugly. Like the Dutch woman who asks, "Do I look fat in this dress?" is always going to get the answer, "Yes, you do. Lose some weight." So I think the Dutch are more insulting because we're being honest and we're just giving you an honest remark about what you think, and that's more damaging to your ego. German civilians leaving the Baltic in 1944, where is it to should have stayed to die? Most of them did die. So would you wreck Dries van Langenhoven in a 1v1 fight? I probably would. I'm like twice as heavy as him. I've met him. I mean, he's Belgian. He's not a very big guy. So I probably would. I mean, if he wants to do a friendly sparring match, I'll do it. I've said this many times. Like, if you actually want to fight me, set up a tournament. I'll do it. Be fun. I like boxing. I'm not gonna answer that question, Pep. I'm sorry. Defeated White Russians should have all been refused refuge as deserters. I think there's a difference. If you are completely at the point of defeat and there's no real ability to resist anymore, then okay, maybe then it's okay to give up and try to survive as best you can. Of course, there were redentists like Scorsese and others, but it's not like it's 1945 and the Russians are at the gates of Berlin. It's not at that stage yet, right? So at this point, trying to flee is desertion. Absolutely, yes. Have you ever been in a fist fight? Yes, a lot. Ever lose? Yes, as well. Yes. I live in Rotterdam, and 50% of the population here is non-white. I go out. I'm a big guy, so one of the things that happens is a lot of people will try to prove they're tough by picking a fight with me. Happens quite often. Eddie Hall or Thor, who will win? I'm not confident about making a prediction about that, but so far as what I've seen of Thor, he's not very aggressive and he's still very clumsy with his movements. And Eddie Hall seems way more aggressive, and I think aggression wins fights really. So I think Eddie Hall. I think Eddie Hall might win it, but I'm not very confident about making a prediction. On the whole, I think it's fun to have an event like that. I know. I mean, I know it's all for the money and the hype and everything, but still, it's fun. Opinion on people proposing a conservative alliance with Muslims. Well, I had that debate like a week or two ago now with those guys. Well, I on the whole think on certain issues we could do it, but there's like what was the conclusion of the debate? It was I want you to go back to your countries and you want me to convert to Islam. So kind of hard to get over that. But maybe we can just both try and fight against abortion and gay marriage, I guess. Alliance of convenience is the best we can hope for in certain situations because there's just a really big barrier to cooperation. Semi-chill, yeah. We've got a lot of good fighters in the Netherlands, actually. Bas Rutte, for example, is great. Bas Rutte is to me one of the most Dutch people around. He's got the heavy accent as well. I can do the accent as well. It's like I just start speaking English as if I had a Dutch accent, and I just stop trying to do any sort of English accent, and it sounds like this. But Bas Rutte really has that really heavy Dutch accent, and he's really direct as well, like a Dutch guy, supremely confident. Will always tell you the truth. Bas Rutte to me is like the ultimate, the platonic ideal of a Dutchman. Except he's Brabants, so he's a bit too short, and he should have some hair maybe. But otherwise, yeah. Could you describe the feeling of you get when you walk to the city center of Rotterdam? Oh, I feel like I'm in Babel, man. Den Haag is the same. architecture, some of the worst you'll ever see. Like I think that Rem Koolhaas needs to be tried by the International Court of Justice for Crimes Against Humanity for what he did to the city center. But it's the ugliest modern architecture you'll see, and you'll hardly. Well, it's not quite true. You won't hardly see whitefish, but there's a lot of multiculturalism. Uh, so it's depressing, man. I try not to go to the city center. Ally with Muslim nationalists in their own country. Well, that's kind of what I proposed. Like we can geopolitically work together. We can work on a large scale. We can work philosophically. Like we can try to find coherent arguments against liberalism and socialism and leftism and Marxism based on both of our worldviews, and we can agree to hate the same people. But I don't think while we're in the same countries it'll really work. Also because it causes a lot of enmity. Like a lot of the anti-Islam sentiment from the PVV and so on. It's just because those people are over here. I don't think half as many people would care about Erdogan or anything if they weren't here. Is there a future for Western Europeans in our homelands beyond nation-state nationalism? Could we survive and thrive in a geographical enclaves? I don't know if I can make a prediction about that. I do see kind of that happening already, at least here in my city in Rotterdam. You already see the sort of segregated ethnic areas. Like there'll be a Dutch neighborhood, there'll be a Moroccan neighborhood, some more mixed ones. But you already see this ethnic segregation happening all over the big cities in the Netherlands. And we're going to get a new Verzuiling one way or another. I just don't know how long that will hold and if that's really a recipe for the future. I mean, look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was a completely ethnically segregated society with I read a book once about Lodz, the city on the border between Ukraine, Poland, Romania, and so there were a lot of Poles and a lot of Ukrainians and a lot of Russians and so living there. Well, not many Russians actually, but some. And they had their own neighborhoods and their own shops and their own religious communities and so on. And then when the Russian Empire fell and after the First World War, ethnic cleansing completely off the rails. And so it's really it's a really it's a very unquiet piece where it could at any moment break out into violence. So I'm not sure that's really a long-term proposal. Also, it's kind of a surrender because we're still a majority and we should be willing to take power within our own countries and rule our own countries. Let me see if I have something more in my notes that could be talked about. Oh yeah, I had this thought that I might want to write something about. I think you ever think about the water cycle? You probably haven't, but the water, like there's a lot of cycles. You've got the tectonic cycle and the carbon cycle, water cycle. There's a lot of cyclical things in nature, really, kind of like civilizations. But a water cycle, I think it's kind of an adventure. Like imagine being a water drop where you are evaporated up from the surface of the sea and you come into the clouds and you travel around hundreds of kilometers and then you're ejected at super high speed down into the ground where you sit in a pool or in a river, or you travel with the river all the way down back into the sea. It's kind of adventurous. Wouldn't mind being a raindrop for a day. Seems fun. Right. I do welcome ever more increasing BAME people on Brit TV. The normies will wake up if black and brown are even more of a fixture in the media. I don't know if that's true. Like in the United States, aren't blacks and homosexuals and so on already incredibly overrepresented? And they don't have a majority of people waking up. So I don't know. I mean, if anything, I think in the UK, the one thing that would wake people up is the increasing police state you guys have over there. Because there's real authoritarian streak in you. Strange for the country that invented liberalism, but And even in your fiction, like V for Vendetta, Brave New World, 1984, these are all British works of fiction. Either the Brits are behind it all, or there's just something in the character there that likes a bit of authoritarianism. But if anything were to wake the normal Brits up, I would have thought it would be this really bad police that you have with like one CCTV camera per person or something, and these really strict laws with your really shitty common law system as well. But no, that doesn't seem to be the case. Let me see here. Is as a healthy guy in his early 20s, is it worth getting a COVID vaccine? I don't know. I think no, probably not. I mean, you'd probably survive getting COVID anyway. So I mean, a friend of mine got it, and he's a big healthy guy, and he had like a bit of a flu for a week, and then he was okay. So I think you'd probably be fine as a young guy. You don't really need a vaccine. Is the entertainment business in America that most Europeans consume the biggest poison we have? Yes. Or at least one of the top. Like if I were to do an autopsy on Western Europe at some point, it'd be up there in the comorbidities at least. What do you think of the term cultural Marxism? I have a video in Dutch on the Dutch channel about this. It's a term that actually exists. It's a term that was created by the likes of Marcuse and Adorno and so on. Gramsci was the one who first coined it, I think. Could be wrong about that. But in the whole, it's just an academic discipline within Marxism. That's how it originated. That's how they self-described it. That's how people like Marcuse and Adorno and Derrida and so on use the term. So it does exist. It does get used a bit over much, and like everything subversive is like, oh, that's cultural Marxism. That's not really quite what it is, but it is a subversive academic discipline. It does exist, and the fact that it's being framed as some kind of conspiracy theory is just typical of how the left doesn't want to deal with issues by having a debate, but just by demonizing things. What's the best restaurant in Schiedam? This is a worker city, man. It's not many great restaurants. Is the Dutch colonial history constantly brought up as bad as Britain's? I don't think as much as yours is, no, because we didn't have as big a role in the slave trade. They do try, but the funny thing is that a large part of the Dutch population doesn't really seem to care, because it's tied in with Zwarte Piet as well, and a huge amount of people really are defensive about Zwarte Piet. So the whole "oh, you were guilty about slavery" thing has kind of become like, "oh, but you just want to take Zwarte Piet away." So I find it kind of funny that they try so hard to bring those kind of narratives in, but a lot of people just ignore it. And if they were going to do that, they really should focus on Indonesia. But the thing is, the Indonesians who live here, the Indos, they're not Indonesian quite, they're Indos, or they're a different group. Indos and Moluccas are the main groups, are very nationalistic, very patriotic. They're extremely overrepresented in the armed forces and in nationalistic movements and so on. So they don't whine about the colonial history. So it's very hard to get that ball rolling with them. So it's the blacks mostly from Suriname who complain about it, and the Antilles, but they don't get much traction. Yeah, they get some traction among like the media and in Amsterdam, but I don't see it nearly as badly as it is in the United States, where there's constant cucking about it on TV. Not quite. Childlike adults in Britain. Brits are passive. Yeah, interestingly, I'm not sure why that is. I mean, you colonized like a quarter of the globe. Maybe they all moved to Australia. All your Chads moved to Australia. The rest died fighting the Germans. Brabant Chads. It's true that a lot of our good fighters are from Brabant. So I guess it's the manlet anger, right? Like it must really suck to be Brabants, because in any other part of the world you'd be tall, but in the Netherlands you're short. I guess that really pisses them off, gives them that real anger to be good fighters. What do you think of the Czechs? I don't know. They're great at defenestrating people, I guess. don't really have an opinion on the Czechs. You via Afrikaners as fellow Dutchmen, and would you welcome them back if they migrate from South Africa? Yes, Afrikaners I would. Not the pure Anglo ones, though. Those can go over to Britain. But the Afrikaans Boeren and the ones who are mixed Dutch, yeah, I'd accept them back, definitely. But many of them don't want to come back, right? There was a stream on Semiagog's channel a while back with two Afrikaans guys, and I've heard this a lot from a lot of Afrikaans people as well, that a lot of them don't want to go back because it's not the same. They have their freedom. Like you can't really be like an estate farmer and living with the wilderness and so on, like you can in South Africa if you move to the Netherlands. This is one big giant city almost, and there's not enough Drenthe to go around for that kind of farming. So, and it's different history and so on, and they're kind of afraid of losing their culture. And I guess to an extent they would. They're a bit different. It's like the Flemish are a little bit different from the Northern Dutch, and we're all Dutch, but it's a bit different. So I don't blame them, but I think it is a bit suicidal. I don't think South Africa can survive. Boers in South Africa can survive if the American hegemony continues to exist. It'll be the death of them, I'm afraid. Living man, you're a little bit taller than me in that case. Do you think that you could divide people further into sub races like Mediterranean, Central European, Nordic? If you want to think in those terms, you don't need to think about races. It's more like ethnic groups. It's wait, can I? Oh wait, I don't have those pictures here. Survive the Jive is the guide to go to for these things. But if you go to S&Ps and genetic and gene clustering and so on, you can easily isolate subgroups of populations by genetic clusters, and there's overlap, of course, on the edges. And there's if you take an even broader perspective and you isolate less genes, you can more easily identify things like European, African, and then within European you can isolate groups, and it becomes harder and harder the lower you go. But it is definitely with genetic testing possible to prove that there are different ethnic groups. Deutsch Bohemian. Yeah. Guess the German relation with the Czechs is a bit complex because they were always part of the Holy Roman Empire as the only completely non-German group. Because there were Poles in the Holy Roman Empire, of course, but they weren't they weren't a principality, and they certainly weren't an elector, because the Elector of Bohemia was one of the important princes, especially in the early Holy Roman Empire. So the Czechs are very much this fringe group who are in between Germans and Slavs in many ways, and they're culturally close to Germans. They have much more of a history with Germans. So I guess for Germans, Czechia is a much more complex subject. I've been to Prague a few times. Czech is quite nice. But from a Dutch perspective, there isn't that much to say. That's sort of like the Eastern Germanic people's problem. Like the Ostmark, that's the Ostmark's problem. We're over here, we're the Westmark. The French are our problem. Like we defend the German people from the French, the Austrians defend them from the Slavs and the Italians, and the Northern Germanics, I guess, also from Slavs and the Baltics and so on. What's your opinion on the homogenization of Dutch accents? For example, people in Amsterdam with an actual authentic accent getting made fun of by Yuppies with that. Yeah, ABN. I have a bit of a Rotterdam accent. Not a very heavy one, and I can lean into it, but I like regional differences. I like that sort of character. But I'm afraid that with technology, and especially communications technology advancing rapidly, it's kind of inevitable that regional differences like that disappear. Like worstenbroodjes are everywhere, not just in Brabant, right? Things like that. Everyone drinks beer from. Well, you can get Amstel anywhere. You can get Grols anywhere. You can get Hertog Jan anywhere. You can even get like Belgian beers. So, did you know the Belgian Abdij Westmalle is one of the oldest corporations in Europe? It was founded in 862, and it's still an ongoing corporation. Interestingly enough. What's your favorite city in Germany? Probably Dresden. Dresden is very beautiful. Um, I lived in Lübeck for about 6 months, an old Hansestadt, and I quite liked Lübeck. Very close to the countryside, semi-rural sort of. Lübeck's quite nice, but that's not a major city. So, and what's the capital of Munich? Munich is also quite nice, with and Salzburg. So is Salzburg in Austria? Technically, I think it is. But I have to say probably Dresden for the architecture. Do you believe that to be a true Dutchman, you must have a certain ideal or spirit? Like a Dutch communist is genetically Dutch, but they don't share the historic Dutch spirit. Yes, I mean you can be like genetically Dutch Americans, for example. There's a few communities in America who are relatively pure one ethnicity or another, right? Like Swedish in Minnesota, Dutch in Iowa, and in a few places like Vermont and so on. Anglo in Maine and all that. So there's a few fairly unmixed genetic heritage Americans, but I wouldn't call them Dutch, right? They have the genetics perhaps, but they're not Dutch. They don't speak the language. They don't know the culture. They don't know how to act when they come here. Americans always run their mouths. They always talk, 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 with nothing to say. And the tourists who come here are a lot of actually Americans of Dutch descent, of course, and they act like Americans, fat, talkative, just not Dutch. So yeah, you do have to be part of the culture. You have to speak the language. There's an identity is more than just blood. It's Blut und Boden and so on. So it's not just the fact that you're part of the group genetically. It's not enough. Right. Anything else? I think I want to show you a few more. No, not really anything interesting to show you there. Let's see if there's any questions. And how long have we been going at this? Hour and a half. That's quite long already. I always have so many questions for me at these AMAs. I always have some things planned I want to talk about, but then I get really swamped with questions. Are Zeeuwen really Dutch? Yes, but there's an interesting thing there, which Zeeuwen have a lot of more incidents of black hair, and what I've read supposedly that has to do with that they have more Celtic admixture, specifically Pictish actually. So in a strange sense, they're a bit genetically connected with the Scottish. Of course, another fun thing is that Yorkshire is for a large part Frisian, because people don't tend to know this, but during the Viking era, there were Frisian Vikings. We call it Viking with W traditionally, and they raided especially the coast of Northumbria and Yorkshire, and they raped a lot of women and established communities and so on. And if you go back even further, and again, Survival Jive has a video about this, Dutch Chads actually committed genocide on the Proto-Anglos, or the Proto-Britannic tribes, the people who built Stonehenge, the burial mounds around Stonehenge. Those people were eradicated in the male line by Germanic tribes coming from the Rhineland area and the Low Countries. So their genetics still continue in the Y chromosome line, the female genetic line, but their male genetic line is ended because they were all murdered by Frisians and Dutch and Rhineland Mannerbunds coming over. Oh yeah, interesting little fact that Anglos are well, they're not Anglos quite, because it's a hodgepodge of genetics over there, right? Normans, Anglos, Saxons, Celts, all kinds of stuff, and you get, of course, ethnic divergence and ethnogenesis as well. So they're their own group, but there's some Frisian genetics mixed in there a lot as well. Did Mussolini make fascism, or did it exist as an ideology beforehand? Did the Annunzio call himself a fascist? I think Mussolini did coin the term fascist. Um, I guess it kind of depends on how you define the idea of fascism. If you take it in its completely modern form, it's a creation by Mussolini, who took a lot of inspiration, especially in the aesthetics, from the Annunzio. But the Annunzio, for example, didn't have that much influence on the economics and the corporatist thing. That's all Mussolini, because Mussolini was a syndicalist and a socialist, and he came up with all those what's it name, corporatist ideas and so on within fascist Italy. The Nunzio was more, he was the artist. He came up with the salutes and black shirts and the speeches on the balconies and the parades and things like that. That was his thing in what was it in Trieste? It was on the Adriatic, part of Croatia now. Whatever the name of that city was, they occupied for a while. Um, so Mussolini definitely coined the term and had a lot of influence on the actual policy of it, and a lot of the aesthetics were coined by the Nunzio. But if you think about fascism, like in what it is, it's you could say Roman dictators acted kind of fascistically, um, and the Roman Empire could be maybe said to have some aspects of that. But it's like it's kind of how broad do you define it, and do you look at the economic policies? And um, one thing I will say about uh, fascism of Mussolini, it was neither anti-Semitic nor racist, actually. Mixing with Eritreans when they conquered Eritrea, for example, wasn't really seen as a problem, and they didn't have a problem with Jews either within the system. Fascism, as such, is really about this form of the state. It's really about the authoritarianism, the heroic aspect within society, the striving for a greater ideal. Germanic National Socialism actually has very different roots. It has a lot of roots in 19th century romantic, actually liberal ideas about. I mean, the Drang nach Osten and Lebensraum. These are terms from the 19th century, from the 1850s. German liberals like Ernst Moritz Arndt were writing about this, um, and that was in the 1820s and 30s. And same with the anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was always much more of an outspoken part of German society because, well, they had a lot more of them as well. Um, and the anti-Slavic sentiment and the racial superiority thing, and also the much more integrated idea of state and people, which was a part of fascist thinking. But der Volksstaat, which is actually an idea from Arthur Müller von den Bruck, I think, and which was espoused by people like Götz Pasha, who was the general in charge of the Asian Corps in the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. Big social Darwinist, very interesting guy. Wrote a few standard manuals about infantry tactics and so on. I think Bismarck, to an extent, embraced this, and Hindenburg, and so on. It's the Prussian, officer aristocratic class had this sort of idea of Gut und Boden in them a bit, but elitist. And their solution after the fall of the Kaiserreich was um, the Volksstaat, where the people, nation are one. And this was based on Clausewitz's idea of totale Krieg, where everything is mobilized in the service of the state for war. This is from the Napoleonic era, no less. So it's a very different tradition and way of thinking, what led to National Socialism, and it has its roots in Germanic national liberal ideas for part, and in folkish sentiments, and in the Prussian militarist tradition. And while fascism in Italy is really much more on the romantic side, the glorification of Rome and so on, and the authoritarian idea of the state was more of a means to an end, I think. So they're quite different things. Mussolini wasn't Hitler, and fascism isn't National Socialism. What was the history of World War II taught in Dutch schools like? I don't know. I didn't go to Dutch school as a kid. German people in general. Well, as I understand it, in Germany, it's especially taught to be very, very guilty. And I've met some Germans, especially in like the left wing circles in Berlin. Boy, do they like Deutschland verrecken is one of their slogans of the German Antifa, which means death to Germany, essentially. And Bomber Harris do it again. It's one of they came up with that slogan. Germans did came up with that slogan, Antifa. So there's a big, big self-hate taught to them about their Erbsünde, their inherited guilt. In the Netherlands, I believe it's not nearly as bad, but they are trying to push this thing. Like, oh, we collaborated, and we've got. You know that per capita more Jews were removed in the Netherlands than in Germany itself. Like we've got like 85% or so of the Jewish population was removed from the Netherlands. I think that's higher than anywhere else, and so they do try to guilt us about this. But again, the Dutch are less sensitive to these things somehow. It's a thing, and Holocaust denial is a bad thing, and anti-Semitism is a very bad thing. But it's not taken nearly. It's worse in the United States, I think, to be someone like that in public. You'll be attacked even harsher. I mean, Holocaust denial was even decriminalized over here in 2012 on the basis of free speech. Funnily enough, so sure, it's a bad thing, but it's. I believe in this Dutch exceptionist attitude that we've just got too much common sense to be as badly affected by these things. Why do you think communists in China are highly nationalistic? The American communists are internationalists. Different generations of thinking. The Chinese didn't have the influence of the cultural Marxist school of thinking. Just different directions of development. Like earlier I talked about branching, genetic branches, or their splits. You got that in terms of ideas as well. It's actually helpful if you think about ideologies the same way as genetics, where there's pressures and selections. And there was just a different pressure and a different selection within the Chinese communist thinking. Are you in favor of referenda? I guess so. I think in the current situation, the common sense of the general population will trump ideology, so they would vote for more right-wing nationalistic, more for better things if we put them to referenda. Are referenda really a tool we should have? I'm in doubt about that. Makes governing kind of hard if you have to have consultations of the people on every single issue. So I think a better solution is to localize politics a lot more, put a lot more power in the hands of municipalities and provinces and so on. Have the people in charge be a lot more closer to the people and a lot more accountable to the people would be my solution rather than referenda. If there was a large Germanic state in America, hold on. Where did that go? If there was a large Germanic state in America had less power, would you support imperialism? I think we'd outcompete you on an economics level anyway. Then just kind of migrate over, slowly take over everywhere, like the Chinese are doing. You just have German business communities popping up everywhere, bratwurst shops everywhere. You know, you go to the inner cities, there'll be that German shop you have to go to for all your commodities. You have to get Schultenbrau and bratwurst. Just do that the way the Chinese do. If in the Netherlands they use the term white as a racial term, they've started doing, like we always say blanc usually, and we do use that as a racial term. They're starting to use wit in the media because they are copying everything from the United States. Blanc is used as a racial term, but we use the sort of racialized terms autochtoon and allochtoon a lot, and everyone knows that that means white and non-white in reality. And I find it kind of funny. You talk to someone, an immigrant or an allochtoon, and you say foreigner or you say Dutch, and they'll immediately know what you mean. And they use those terms to refer to themselves. Like they'll refer to themselves as foreigners, even if they're born here. And when they say Dutch, they mean white Dutch. It's kind of funny when you talk to them, and they don't think about it, but they implicitly acknowledge that these things. But the terms we use that are racialized are more like autochtoon and allochtoon, and those are implicitly racialized. Hoarding precious metals and silver stock. Buy physical, don't buy stocks, don't buy futures. If you don't have it in your hands, you don't own it. It's a great inflation hedge. If you Like one of the best ways to abstract actual economic issues is to look at things in terms of energy prices. So look at oil prices or coal prices throughout history, or wood if you go back far enough. And if you track oil prices and so on compared to gold, they track almost exactly the same. So gold always stays level with energy prices, which means they always track very well with commodity prices, which means you always get value for your goods. So they're a great anti-inflation hedge. They're a great way to carry value into the future. They're a store of value. That's what gold is. Now you don't get a dividend on it. That's Warren Buffett's famous quote. Gold doesn't have a dividend. So mix your portfolio, right? Get some. Don't buy bonds at this point. Buying bonds is completely pointless. But buying stocks in a reliable company that you know will carry on into the future, something like supermarkets, commodity companies, things like that. Those are likely to continue for a very long time, continue to exist, have healthy profits. Shell, things like that. If Shell stops selling oil, they're already diversifying into alternative energies. Shell will be fine. Um, and those pay a dividend, and then you can reinvest that, right? You want to, well, what am I giving investment advice over here? If you don't know this, then go look up Investopedia or something about hedging your bets. On a scale of 1 to 0, how demoralized are you? I'm not demoralized. I'm very fatalistic about things. I think things are pretty bleak, but I'm an extremely pessimistic person anyway, and I just keep myself busy. I don't give up just because I'm not demoralized. I'm just gonna keep going. Like this is, I think, the advantage of Calvinist and Protestant sort of work ethic thinking. Things are miserable, and that's great because you shouldn't be happy, and being happy is terrible anyway. So let's continue to work and let's carry on. And I think that's been a very helpful attitude for me, at least. It doesn't matter how shit things get, just keep carrying on. It wasn't God's plan for you to be happy anyway. My theory why the Dutch are the tallest nation on average is because Netherlands are low countries, and so the Dutch height makes up for lack of altitude of the country. Yeah, that's a traditional joke. We're told to survive it when a dike breaks. It's actually got more to do with sexual selection. There's a few studies about this where Dutch women apparently very strongly select for taller men and have been for the last century or so. And it's not quite understood why it's so much more pronounced over here than in other countries. Also, genetic potential, because we consume a lot of protein in our diet due to cheese and milk. We consume relatively large amounts of protein. We reach our genetic potential more easily, and sexual selection. Women just like tall. Dutch women just like tall guys, very tall guys. Like to dairy investing, would you know? Do these streams more often? I don't know. I don't. I'm not sure about doing streams. I prefer to talk about a subject more defined because I've touched on like 100 subjects here, and I haven't really explored or explained anything of them properly in depth. Maybe some of the people who already know, like the hard problem of consciousness, 90% of you listeners won't have a faint idea what I'm talking about. And to give that subject justice and to that guy's question justice, it would be like a complete video on its own, or maybe a podcast. And even there, it would be too short because if you actually want to do justice to a topic like that, you need to do like a whole series of podcasts actually setting out the research and reading and explaining the papers and the current state of the things. So I'm not too sure these things are helpful. Maybe they're interesting to a lot of people for introducing these things to them, and they can do research on their own. But on the whole, I find this a little unsatisfying because I don't have everything ready to go, and I'm leaving a lot of things on the table, in my opinion. Anyway. Do they use the term Caucasian in the Netherlands? No. A study in China was done showing the Chinese are much more likely to use racial terms in genetic research. Yes, that's correct. There's a lot. There's a lot of. There's a lot of politically incorrect research coming from Chinese universities. Actually, do you believe in Hollandocentrism? Do you mean in the sense that Holland is sort of prevailing within the Netherlands and kind of dominates culture? That does happen a bit. Randstad versus Platteland. Do I believe in it? It's a phenomenon. It's a thing that exists. Do you mean in the sense that we are better than the rest of the country? Yes, we are definitely better than Brabant and Limburg. Amsterdam, though, like, let's ignore that exists. Okay, Amsterdam, let's pretend that's not a factor. Stay away, we are full. Yes, we are very much full. We're the 14th most populated country in the world, man. Tiny little, like, and the countries that are above us are like Taiwan, Singapore, as in like population per square kilometer. Way too many people over here. I mean, I don't, and I really hate that in the Netherlands, whenever you try to go out into nature, like unless you go all the way to Drenthe and really to the northeast, there's always a building on the horizon somewhere, man. You go to the dunes over here to take a walk along the beach. There's always some factory chimney or a flat or something in view. There's never that you're a moment alone with nature, or there's other people around as well. It's always so busy, way too busy, way too full. So no, don't come here, especially not if you're an Anglo. Ever been to EDGLD? You'll have to. I don't know what EDGLD is. Is that Dutch? Is that English? Do you mean Ede? I think I've been to Ede. Limburg is the peak of Dutch culture. No. No. You're all short as well. Yeah, no foreigners allowed. Thanks very much. There's 13 million ethnic Dutch. There's like 8 million ethnic Flemish. With our two countries united, we'll be just fine. Plenty of people to do our own work. Like, do you know we're genuinely too economically developed, in my opinion, over here. We've got like something like the highest level of mega corporations per capita, and a huge overrepresentation in terms of small businesses and independent contractors. Like 1 in 8 people in the workforce are RZZ payers, which is independent contractors, or I guess technically speaking, small companies without employees. I don't know what the English term is really, but we have way too much economic activity, to be honest, man. I mean, we're to the point where we need so many immigrants to actually fill out the labor pool. It's not healthy. I'm not sure we should be doing that. I mean, to what purpose does it serve anyway? Who's it enriching? Not a lot of Dutch people, actually, especially the megacorp stuff. Like all the oil refineries over here. I live just so near the river. I go across the river. I'm in Pernis. Pernis is the one of the biggest petrochemical refining industry locations in the world. And a lot of that oil goes to like Germany and France and other places in continental Europe, and the profits all flow to shareholders in different countries. It does employ some Dutch people in the industry, but on the whole, it's like how much of that capital is actually retained within the country. I think we really need to re-examine a lot of our thinking about economics. I've been asked to write an economic plan for a political party, but I just don't have the time. I've done some writing on it, and I might write a lot more about it at some point. There's a lot of things to do, but I really do think we need to rethink a lot of our stuff about economics. And the idiotic leftists always with their, oh, it's inequality and we need to scheefgroei, what's the term? To flatten like the distribution and things. Oh God. Mainstream economists are all either libertarian market thinkers or there are people who are obsessed with inequality, like Piketty, who want to fix inequality just to fix inequality, not because of any of the, like, when was the last time you've heard an economist talk about the problem of usury, or like some libertarians talk about wealth creation from nothing as being a problem, and talk about central banking. Leftists never talk about central banking, by the way. But all of these mainstream economists who are supposedly against the system are either so boring or don't understand what they're really talking about. I'm not a great economist at all, and there's a lot more interesting out of the box thinkers on economics than me. And I haven't really written anything about this. I've never published a paper on anything or anything. But I think I could write some interesting stuff. I just don't have the time. Anyway. Oh, Ede Gelderland. Yes, I've been to Ede, yeah. Have you ever eaten out in Enschede? I don't think so, no. Did the Netherlands have a fascist movement in the anti-war period? Yes, we did. The NSB, they got about 8% of the vote. There's actually a few interesting. So there's this one fascist author called Willem van den Hout, and he's a children's book author. Actually, he did write some ideological work as well, but he wrote children's books particularly for women. And why did he write children's books for women? Because he said that's not something you can leave to women, because they would teach the wrong moral lessons. There's a cabaretier. Cabaretier is like a stand-up comedian, but with a bit more of a variety act. And he was, oh God, I forget his name, but he was such a good writer that despite him being professionally banned after the war, he was apparently still illicitly consulted by a lot of the mainstream comedians and figures of his time to write for them, because he was just such a good writer. He had a radio show on the during the occupation of the Netherlands. I forget the name, but there's a few. One guy is Ballade van de Dode Viking. Anyway, there's actually, in terms of fascistic interwar movements, wasn't really a great electoral success or anything like that, but there were a few interesting intellectuals. A few of them died at the Eastern Front, a few of the journalists. Poems in the Snow by, why can't I remember his name? It's because it's somewhat, hold on. This is a recommendation if you can find it in English, The Ballad of the Dead Viking. Damn it. I can't find it, but yeah, there was quite a few interwar authors and a few characters. One of the ones I would recommend if you're Dutch to read is Gerard Boland. He's not quite a fascist, but because he died in 1921 anyway. But his last lecture, Tekenen der Tijd, is quite an interesting read if you're a Dutch nationalist. He decries things like public schooling, democracy, female voting rights, and things like that. It's a quite interesting lecture from a quite erudite kind of guy. And then there's Ballade van de Dode Viking, which is a interesting little novella. And that same author also wrote a lot of poetry. There's a lot of authors, actually. But that's the thing. In the Netherlands, it was more of a literary intellectual movement with a lot of magazines and radio shows and things like that. And it wasn't really big as a street movement. Like I said, it got only 8% of the votes or so. And interestingly, a lot of the votes they got was from the liberals, not from the confessional Christians. And if you go back on my channel, there's a video called Jan Montijn from National Socialist to Salon Socialist. Jan Montijn was a volunteer in the Kriegsmarine, and he served as well in the Courland pocket as a naval infantryman. and he later went on to adventures in Vietnam. And he turned from a National Socialist to a progressive lefty artist. He's famous as a painter as well. And his biography is interesting because it's extremely exaggerated. He really bigs himself up. But it is interesting to have this adventurous type, because he did these things because he was at heart an adventurer. He wanted to experience things. That's why he volunteered to go into the Kriegsmarine. And he was one of the few cases of someone coming from a conservative Christian community going into the NSB, because most were actually secularists, liberals, atheists, disenfranchised socialists. Very few Christians actually went over. The children books author is Willem van den Hout, but he has a lot of pseudonyms as well. If we come to England, it's to install our king. Yes. But then he'll probably backstab us again. What's the Great Reset? Man, there's a lot of videos on YouTube about that will explain to you that in great detail. Any idea what happened to Greyfield Strait? I heard he committed suicide, but I've never been able to confirm that. I know the guy behind Waffenruhe committed suicide. Shame, he had great music. What if I told you a big part of Rotterdam are Brabanders? I know. I'm something like a quarter Brabants on one side. Van der Lubbe. Marius van der Lubbe. I think he was probably... He was mentally retarded. Like, okay, Marius van der Lubbe, for those who don't know, is the communist guy who set fire to the Reichstag. The Reichstag fire, which then allowed the Enabling Act to pass, and then Hitler took total power over Germany. Marius van der Lubbe was mentally retarded. I've read a bit about his biography, or a biography about him. He didn't write a biography himself. I think he was probably... It's kind of like the 9/11 situation, where they knew it was going to happen, and it was just some retards operating on their own. So they kind of let it happen because it was convenient for them. That's kind of how I look at it. Who is the most powerful person in the world? Now, see, the most powerful person in the world would make sure that you don't know he's the most powerful person in the world. So I probably, whatever I say, I'm going to be wrong. Because if they're truly the most powerful person in the world, I wouldn't know. But on the face of it, I don't know. Some of the people on the board of the Fed probably in an indirect sense. I guess your Mr. Rothschild over there would be rank high up there with them. But I think like the Rothschilds are such a visible group that's too easy, too much on the face of it. Xi Jinping is the most powerful person in the world. He might be. I mean, China's pretty powerful at this point. Still, America, maybe in 10 years' time, Xi Jinping will be the most powerful person in the world. We'll see. Right. 50 people watching. Okay. Kim Jong-un. Yes. Kim Jong-un is the most powerful person in the world. What's your opinion on Dutroux? Right, so for people who don't know, the Dutroux case is a famous case of pedophilia within the Belgian state. Wait, is the Dutroux on the Belgian one? Because we've got one in the Netherlands, or we've got the one in Belgium. Dutroux was the Belgian one, I think, right? And he got really let off with a light sentence. Demmink is the case of pedophilia in the Netherlands, and the Dutroux is the case of pedophilia in Belgium. funny how that happens. Um, pedophilia at high levels does happen. I mean, when I lived in Portugal, there was this big scandal with Portuguese politicians at a Catholic orphanage for boys where they were molesting boys, and that was a huge media scandal at the time called Casa Pia scandal. Um, and several, I think the prime minister resigned over that one. It's all the same kind of time period as well, Dutroux and Deming and the Casa Pia. And then wasn't there this scandal a little while back about German social services placing children in the care of known pedophiles? I think there was, right? I don't know. There's just a lot of weird things going on about that. I'm not really into those sorts of things. I think you probably need to talk to like Thomas Baden Rees about the more conspiracy side of things like that. I'm not too familiar. I just know that it's kind of a lot of funny coincidences there, especially with Deming. Um, and it does happen, pedophilia at the highest levels. I mean, statistically, right? If you're, it's like the same thing with sociopaths. There's a huge overrepresentation of sociopaths at the top level of power because they are able to work themselves at that level. If you're a pedophile who wants to get away with it, one of the best ways is to get enough power so that you can shut people up, right? So it makes sense that some of them would try, at least statistically speaking. Practical tips on supporting localism. Buy from farmers markets. In the Netherlands, we still have a lot of small markets in town centers and so on. Buy your food stuff from there. Buy from co-ops. Buy directly from farmers. Don't give your money to foreigners. Don't give your money to big companies. If you can avoid it, even if you have to pay a little more, buy local and avoid consumerist products and always buy your stuff. Never like don't rent. Don't take a lease car. Don't roll your mobile phone program forward. Just buy your mobile phone, right? Because you'll eventually end up paying more on rent anyway on your rent. Yes. Um, so try to avoid like financially helping foreigners and mega corporations. And for the rest, try to focus on your friends and family and the community and people who agree with you. Don't argue with strangers on the internet. I've learned that lesson the hard way. Way too engaged on the internet. Really had that red pill rage going for a while. Just try to build a real life community. It's easier once you've met a lot of people who are red pilled and they're in your friend circle. That makes it easier, of course. That first stage is kind of hard without an organization or something or some ways to meet people. But um, don't be an internet person. It's not helpful. It's not good for your mental health. Um, More tips on localism. Get involved in your like if you're Dutch especially, get involved in your municipal politics because the barrier is fucking low. It's like in some municipalities you need less than 1,000 votes to get a seat. Um, they've got open evenings. There's a lot of ways to influence local policy. They've got public consultations on public works. If you just read the local paper in your municipality and you stay informed on the issues and you get people around you informed on the issues, you can get a lot more done. I've got a project here in my community called Brandersknecht where we do these sorts of things, where we try to push a bit on the local politics and so on. And that's very easy because these people are visible, accountable, and reachable, unlike parliamentarians, unlike like business people or anything like that, unlike the premier. So try to get involved with your local politics. It's a lot more achievable most of the time. Same that even applies to Americans because they have to elect absolutely everything, like judges and things like that. So yeah, those would be my tips for things you can easily do yourself. Thoughts on the Donbass war? Just typical American power plays. You know, geopolitics. I mean, what do you want? These proxy wars have been going on for 60 years or so. Ever since we had nukes and we couldn't do regular conventional warfare. Arvel has this interesting thing where he's in favor, like he's a pretty red pill guy, but he's in favor of globalism because he thinks so long as individual nation states exist, individual governments, there's always the risk that we're going to go to war. And with weapons becoming ever more complex and advanced and destructive, it means that on a long enough timeline, the likelihood of us destroying humanity with some of these weapons approaches one. And mathematically speaking, he's correct about that. I find that an interesting take. Haven't formulated a good answer to him yet. Been thinking about that. On the whole, though, I don't mind war. I think war is a good thing. Like I mentioned, Gotz Pasha, General Gotz Pasha, and a lot of these First World War generals were like this. They believed war was just a way to spiritually cleanse the people and strengthen the people. It's just necessary bloodletting that you had to have every so often. And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, socially Darwinist. The thing is, and I don't forget who made this. I think maybe the Jolly Heretic, but this one guy had this mathematical prediction model, like warfare is beneficial up to this point of death of your young male population, therefore cutting off X amount of your genetic potential. So past a certain point, like in total war especially, it becomes a very poor return on investment because you're throwing away a lot of good genetics there. A lot of your quality people are dying. And I have never seen a good study about like what kind of people die. Like from a common sense perspective, you'd say it's the more heroic and the more moral people who die first because they take more risks. Ernst Junger survived like 11 gunshots, and for 4 years he was in the trenches as a frontline lieutenant of a combat platoon, and he was like in the hospital every 3 to 6 months to convalesce from some combat injury, and he survived. Of course, that's an exception. But I don't think there's very good studies on this. But there's the anecdote that the British officer class suffered disproportionately more casualties, per capita than the common soldier. So on the whole, like with total war, there's a point of where your return on investment goes negative. It's like the sunk cost fallacy to an extent. So you have to take that into account. But anyway, I have to think about formulating this answer to Arvel because on a fundamental emotional gut reaction, is like, no, we need to keep nation states. But his argument does make some sense. So I'm still thinking of an answer to that. Thought on the sea level rising and possibly swallowing all up the Netherlands. Can we keep building high enough dikes? Yes. There's the Dutch waterworks engineer who designed a plan to polder in the entirety of the North Sea in the 60s, and he thought it could be done. This was the guy who designed the Delta Works, actually. What's his name? I forget. But he also formulated the plan. We just we build a dike from Dunkirk to Calais, and then we just to the Orkney Islands, and then we build a giant bassin and start draining it. And he thought it would be achievable. I'm not a waterway engineer. I don't really know if that is possible, but considering the technology and so on, I think it's absolutely achievable. And even if it isn't, well, if you look at a long enough timeline of the geological plane of the Earth, it's pretty shifting. Like every 100 million years or so, the planet looks completely different with inland seas in different places. Dried up Mediterranean, for example, not even like a million years ago. So the geological shape of the Earth is constantly shifting anyway. So that's just how it is. And sea levels would have to rise pretty dramatically for us not to be able to build dikes against it. So it'd be something like 3 meters, I think, on average. And otherwise, we'll just turn this place into Atlantis. Then the Anglos can never win another naval war against us as well. So that's a plus. Yeah, I like Greyfield Stray's music as well. It's just a rumor I heard about him, and I haven't seen anything from him in years. Yeah, great music. Yeah, it's one of those things. The Brits make a lot of content, man. When's the next Balkan War gonna happen? Wasn't there something with Macedonia recently? Who knows with those guys? Maybe in 5 years' time, there will be another genocide of Serbians and Croatians or something. You never know. Who were the people in charge of imposing multiculturalism to Europe? The Americans. That's a complex issue. There's no one single person or anything. I'm getting a bit tired. I don't know if anyone has any good questions left. Ask them now. Otherwise, I'm gonna start rounding this off. I think it's already been 2 hours. Jesus, I didn't think I'd be more than an hour on this. Do you play video games? No. I wasted way too much time when I was younger on video games, and I've developed a strong dislike for them. Anything that wastes time, really. You were at the Malieveld protest today. Heard lots of people talking about voting for right parties. How do we capitalize on this and move the political spectrum to the right? I don't really know. I haven't been engaging too much with the protest side of things. One thing I found interesting is this Black Box channel, this normie journalist, former cyclist, who really turned anti-system due to the lockdown stuff. I guess, back in 2015, people and 2016, people were radicalizing over the migrant issue. And some of that stuck, but a lot of that faded away as well. I think the corona thing is also radicalizing a lot of people, and some of that will probably stick as well. Seems to be a lot more people there getting affected actually and becoming more radical. But the size of the demonstrations are pretty unheard of for the Netherlands. And the rioting. How do you capitalize on that? Yeah. See, I don't really know. I don't know how to talk to these people because they're either quite normies who are really fed up with the system, or they're very lunatic conspiracy theorists like Lange Frans. And both of those groups are sort of outside of my experiential world. I don't really know how to talk very well with these people. Like, I'm the kind of guy who, when doing like a normal job of meeting new people, within half an hour, I'll be trying to explain to you how linear regression works and what a bell curve is, because I need to explain to you these concepts before I can really have a conversation with you. So I'm probably way too autistic to engage with these people. I literally had this like a few weeks ago, just with some like worker and class guys, and I was trying to explain to them about women, and then I ended up literally explaining to them what a bell curve was and a normal distribution and the outliers, and this is a statistical probability and so on, because I needed to explain to them that on what I was actually trying to get at about the women thing, and they just thought I was weird. So I'm not the guy to ask how to red pill the masses, man. That's not my field of expertise. What's the science behind heightened protein intake? You need enough protein to build enough cells to maximize your genetic potential. It's pretty simple. If you're underfed, you don't, during your critical phases of growth, and you don't have, like, especially, it's not just about food, but the right types of food. Protein especially is important in building muscle, organ, like lean tissue. And if you don't have that in the critical moments of growth, then you'll never be able to recover that. And so if you've been eating burgers and fries your whole adolescence, you're not going to reach your genetic potential because you're technically malnourished. It's genuinely a thing. A lot of these Americans who are obese are actually malnourished because they don't get enough nutrients, and they don't get enough protein because they just eat shitloads of fats and carbs. Yeah. Do you know any good books on genetics or racial ethnic genetics? It's more like reading papers. Survive the Jive is one of the channels to go to about a lot of this stuff. He's very good. Of course, he doesn't make it that explicit. He makes it a historical thing, but you'll learn a lot about how genetics works by watching his videos. Like specifically about IQ, you can read the bell curve. what's that Finnish guy's name? I think he died recently. Very famous for his studies about genetics and IQ and so on. Rauno? No, what is this Finnish scientist who has a lot of these papers at all? And then you've got Brit Robert. Man, I can't remember the names. Damn it. It's Robert Spencer? No, that's the Islamist guy. I can't remember. I'll try and look it up and I'll put a comment under the video afterwards because I can't remember right now. Can we move the normie right into a position that supports ecology and durable products? I think that's kind of what the left has been trying, right? By guilt tripping them. I think the main way you convince people at this stage is if they haven't been morally guilt tripped into it, you need to provide them an economic incentive because an economic incentive is always more powerful. So you got the stick, which the left has only been beating you with a stick. You're a bad person if you don't care about the environment. You're a bad person if you don't act green and drive less and use public transport. And that works for some people, but a carrot also works a lot better for a lot of people. You see this with electric cars, for example. The Netherlands buys something like 10% of all Tesla production every single year because we have great tax incentives for driving electrical cars. It's cheaper to buy an electrical car than a comparable quality gasoline or diesel car because of the tax advantages. So you need to give people a carrot to make them more environmentally friendly. And that's only going to work with big things like their heating bill and their car, and because changing minor things in their own behavior and every single day, like cycling to work instead of taking the car, things like that. That's too hard, and these tiny things to change. It'd be very hard to give them enough of a stick or enough of a carrot to change their behavior. You'd literally have to ban cars from getting to their workplace, and they'd have to take a bicycle, for example, or you'd have to make it really financially advantageous to not have a car or something like that. So on the whole, yeah, needs some carrots to add to the sticks, and you need to accept that a lot of people are going to they're always going to go for the easiest low road of least resistance. So they're not going to change things that affect them in a negative way. So yeah. Ed Dutton, yeah, the Jolly Heretic. Yeah, Ed Dutton has some stuff on genetics as well, but I think he's a bit too silly, really. Yes, make it more expensive to buy something new than to repair. That's a good one as well. Raise the standards of electronic and so on. For example, like plastics, for example, you can build very durable plastics, like Bakelite plastics. You could bash someone's skull in with those. But we choose to use a lot of inferior to quality plastics for things. And also, you can make industry mandated stuff. Like I had this conversation with Top Their Down. Like Top Their Down and me are good friends, and he's also a strong environmentalist. I come from an environmentalist background as well. And we had this talk about the economics and logistics of whether we could replace plastics in the food industry with things like glass, jute, wood, and we didn't do the math on it. That's the thing. We'd have to be able to do the math on it because it might be more environmentally unfriendly to log and produce that much glass to replace the plastics, because oil is very readily accessible, and logging down entire forests and blowing out entire beaches into glass, quite expensive, takes more energy, more difficult with transportation and storage. A lot like a lot of second order effects, right? So I'd have to do the math on that, and sometimes I haven't done that. But if you wanted to regulate things so that, for example, you can't have plastic bottles and only glass bottles, you could do that with the regulation. But you'd have to take a good look at the math, whether that's actually more environmentally friendly. Because on its face, it might seem so, but there's always the second order effect. See, this is one of the things I so hate about the left. They'll always try to come up with these easy solutions, like, oh, we'll just use green energy. Yeah, but what are the second order effects? Like, what's your impact on the other economies? Like, yeah. The main thing I hate about leftists is that they're so dumb. I don't even disagree with the environmentalists on what they want to achieve. It's just that they're so dumb about how they're going about things. It's annoying. Right. Why do you still live in a city? Work-related reasons mainly. Why did you start out as a communist? My father's a communist. Mother's a hippie. If you're politically active as a teenager, what you're most likely to encounter is leftist literature. I had a library full of leftist literature at home. That's why I became a communist when I was around, I don't know, 15 or so. If hypothetically a war broke out between the West and a challenger to Western democracy, would you fight? Depends. If it's just America versus Iran, I'm not getting involved. I mean, even if the Dutch sent troops, why would I volunteer for that, for some imperialist war on the behalf of Americans? If, I don't know, Iran sends Scud missiles onto Amsterdam, actually, if they sent them to Amsterdam, I wouldn't even care. But if they start like hitting Dutch people with terrorist attacks or something, maybe I'd then care and do something. But all these imperialist wars in the Middle East, I don't care, man. I let Americans die for oil and their good, their bestest ally over there. Like, that's their problem. There are shops where you have to take your own containers too. Yeah, I mean, there's things you can do, right? The thing is, like, one thing I've realized is, on paper, we've got lots of great solutions we could start implementing tomorrow. On immigration, on environmentalism, on economics, like kill every banker, abolish central banks, more environmentally friendly policies, close the borders, start an economic cooperation development program with the third world, and things like that. It could all be done. There's no will to do it because the vested interests don't. It would cost too much money to get the initial capital set up and to do the shifting of production and so on. And it's not short-term profitable, and we only think in short-term profits anymore. Doesn't serve the interests of the current power elite, so we don't do it. It's not like we don't have the solutions. It's not like this. There hasn't been like decades and decades of debate and thought about all of these things. It's just you don't have the power to implement it. That's really the main thing we need to be focusing, finding ways to get power to implement solutions to all of these problems. Well, I mean, kill the bankers after they've had a trial, right? And not just commit terrorism, like legally and properly in a court of law, sentence them to death for ruining thousands and thousands and millions of lives. Do you support drug legalization? There's again another video on the Dutch channel about this. I make a lot of more of these sort of more middle tier topic videos on my Dutch channel. Drug legalization is a difficult one because it's very hard to like with harsh force of law, you can't ban things. The Americans over the last few decades have really proven that you can't just by force of law or by violence ban things. It takes a cultural shift. The only time I know of that went from complete and open legal drugs in the Belle Epoque around the 1890s and 1900, you could get heroin over the counter and everything. Everything was legal. And the only way that became it was illegal is because there was a big cultural shift after the First World War. All these veterans addicted to heroin and morphine and alcohol provoked a huge backlash from women and from the church and so on. And that's where you got the prohibition from as well. But temperance leagues. And then that's how, when drugs were started to make illegal, and it actually worked because the whole culture was all about it. See, the only way you're going to stop using drugs is if you're constantly being condemned for it by family and friends. And if you're a social outcast for it. If your friends are smoking weed and they think it's cool, and your parents are like, "Oh, it's not bad if he experiments a bit," then you'd have no real encouragement to stop. And just because it's illegal, people don't think on that level. A lot of people, it's the constant social reinforcement around you that makes sure that you stop with something like that. So it takes a cultural shift to make drugs illegal. I think I'm gonna end it, guys. Unless you have some really pertinent last question, I think that'll do. Way longer than I was planning to. Everything's depressing, but it's good to be depressed. So I don't know Joel Davies. I'll have a look at him. Right. Thank you all for coming. Uh, Shout out. Oh, not a stock. Actually, since you're here, you've got an article to write. So you stop watching this live stream right now and you go write that article, because I need those articles so I can publish the magazine already. Okay. Um. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming. For watching, everyone. And well, apparently a lot of you enjoyed this. Maybe I'll do it again sometime in the future, but it's not really one of my favorite things to do. It's uh, it's just a way to put out content quite easily. I understand why people do streams, because it's easy. Anyway, good night, everybody. Have a nice working week.